I haven't seen this grass creep technology. And are we really just talking about, I understand you have the need for the parking, but maybe your consultants have seen it in action and it works. But to me, to say that this is green space, to me, doesn't make sense, especially if cars are going to be parking there during the months when grass is supposed to be growing. So I would like some explanation of that. The second element, one of your consultants mentioned semi-private landscaping around the houses, and I'd like to know how that works.
Can I take a crack at both of those?
Yeah.
Okay. I think that the concept of semi-private landscaping, I understand, Gary, we've worked together before, and I don't think that's exactly what he had in mind. The way the landscaping on the project is intended to be handled is that this will be a condominium, and the single-family houses will be landscaped as part of the condominium, so that the landscaping that's put there will be maintained by the condominium association. The individual homeowners will have a very limited ability to expand upon that, because what we don't want in the community at large is large trees that we didn't expect, large shrubbery that we didn't expect, blocking a view corridor. So it's very important for the overall project that the condominium association will maintain the gardens of the single-family houses. What Gary was talking about is more using landscape to create privacy, and I think that was the gist of it based on other things we've done together. So use of smaller and larger shrubbery to create a sense of privacy, so you can still have a public access walkway, but people can have a sense of space and place that's their own, and that's very typical in the borough. With respect to your second question, here's the rub, and I'd love a better way to deal with this. We think that there's too much parking required on the site, and except for some very, very specific peak use times, that parking is not going to be needed. So do we asphalt over and blacktop over an entire area of the site for the few days a year that it will be used? That seems to me not appropriate given what we're trying to achieve. It also seems to me that more dialogue on how much parking is really required is an important part of developing this final approval, and we would welcome people to take another look at it. Personally, based on my experience, most of that green area can be truly a green area, but because the sensibility is that we need so many spaces, the only way to achieve it alternatively is to blacktop that, which we don't think is appropriate. So I think it's in the dynamic of how many spaces are needed when that concept evolved. And it does work, and as Gary told you, that it is used in other places, and we're happy to reference some of them and let you go see some other spots. But when it is not used, it actually has a lawn effect. There's concrete pavers under the grass that prevent it from being depressed and destroyed. So it does function and gives you a convertible green space. We don't think, as a practical matter, those spaces will be used very often. Thanks.
Any other questions or comments? Yes, gentleman over here.
Good evening. What are we saying? I'm Brian Cheeseborough, and despite the efforts to revive the pronunciation of the name here tonight, but also through the centuries by lots of people, including family members, it is Cheeseborough. I hope to address both the commission and everyone in two capacities. One as a private citizen who has a very, very historical interest both in my linear family but also in my nuclear family for this particular property. Secondly, I'm going to address the commission in the capacity as Deputy Harbor Master, which I'm very pleased to have accepted or succumbed to the pressure that Nancy Gibson to be your deputy. But the first one I'm going to address as a private citizen, and I hope I won't be too burdensome. Just to give you a little bit of history of why I do have such an affinity and almost a symbiotic relationship with this property. My dad, as a teenager, worked as a gardener at the Atwoodc estate. Upon graduating from high school, he became a a shop foreman at the Atwoodc. And after working there for a number of years, he went to university and then returned and became superintendent of operations for the Atwoodc, and then subsequently plant manager for Plaques, which was, when I graduated from high school, I was able to attend university after receiving an interest-free loan from the Atwood Fund. So this, and I mentioned to Spencer Schubel and also talking to Fred, I asked, as an architect, I said, did you happen to notice a little architectural detail on the outbuilding here, the former administrative building? I said, what was that? He said, there's 2 cement blocks by the windows there. And he said, yeah, I did notice it. I said, what architectural purpose did that serve? I said, I don't know, I'm paraphrasing, but I said, I got to concede, I don't know what they were. I said, perhaps to let a little guy stand up there and ask his dad for money, a good humor man. That's precisely what they were put in for. So we didn't come in wet bathing suits from the point and disturb the operations of the administration building in order to get change by, and my dad would often buy it for all the kids down at the point. But I'm speaking principally in support of this because I agree with Fred that this is an opportunity. I feel compelled to speak about it because of the relationship I've had both with Stonington and my family and with this particular property. When I first heard about it, excuse me. When I first heard about it, my initial reaction was no. Of course, I realized being a student of human behavior, I was speaking with Mark about that just like all human beings, my first reaction to anything is no. We're resistant to change. But then, so often I don't comment publicly. I comment to myself, I reflect. I also talk to myself. In that discussion I had, I looked at it, and again, I was initially, no, recalcitrance is part of human nature. And then, upon reflection, I started looking at the property, looked at the proposal. I thought of the term adaptive reuse rather than development. And indeed, the D word is a nasty, nasty word. And I heard comments about, setting these up in linear fashion with exactly the same, as a development would indeed be developed. I think the challenges of a site like this are innumerable. And I think that the professionals in this team are to be commended for truly an inspiring effort. Now, I'm going to use a Likert scale. Everybody's familiar with them. 0 being the worst possible use of this property, 10 being the best possible use of this property. In my estimation, a 6 or 7, but with the proviso that I don't know what an 8, 9, or 10 would be. So I'm erring to the side of caution. It's a very, very ambitious undertaking to try to adapt and remain consistent. Ingrid had a lot of good things to say. She stole my thunder on a couple of them. It's okay. But I have to disagree in that with the architecture itself, I think you've done a splendid job of blending in with the community. And I don't think, and my wife's originally from Atlanta, and we've had a lot of discussions, and we've lived in California, spent 10 years in San Diego. I worked with David Packard when he ran Hewlett-Packard as a project manager, initially getting out of. So I've worked in Silicon Valley, been around the country. I've lived in Atlanta, I've lived in California. And I don't think Yankees are stodgy and just, they don't want anything to change. It is the challenge of designing things that meet cohesiveness and continuity while integrating new technologies. The term Harley-Davidson uses is homologation, forward to the past. If you look at a Harley-Davidson today, it looks more like a Harley-Davidson of the 1940s and 50s than it does of the 90s or the 21st century. Yet, the electronics, the engine, all aspects of the mechanicals are the preeminent manufacturing of a motorcycle in the world today. put them up against BMWs, Motor Guzzi's, anything. Those are the engineering challenges and design challenges that these folks are confronted with. To blend in with a community that indeed does have a very historic past. We are not an exclusively residential peninsula where all the houses were built at the same time in a developmental fashion. It is an evolutionary history that we have here that they're trying to blend in with. And I think that the component of residential and commercial aspects, originally when William Chesebro, under the Governor Winthrop Party's charter to come down to Stonington, and become the first settler, was to settle Stonington and promote community and commerce. And despite a lot of things that the Boston papers say about Stonington, I disagree with them too. I think that the spirited debate that occurs here is oftentimes courteous. Sometimes it gets a little raucous, but it's usually very courteous. People listen to one another. Most often they agree to respectfully disagree. And then when, in the final analysis, something does come to a synthesis from a thesis and antithesis, and the battle that's enjoined between those, the synthesis is oftentimes way better than either of the two original theses. I think that's what we have here. I think that the considerations that were given to this property over time and the fears that it would become something that we didn't want it to be, and I harbor those fears, did and still do. Like I said, tonight I'm going to speak principally in support of it. There are some concerns, very, very, I won't say grave concerns, but concerns that I have, and several of them were expressed by Inger. But I think that principally the professionals here on this team have been very participatory in listening to the needs of the community and assenting to those needs when they were either compelling needs that they recognized or they were just reasonable. I would hope that spirit of cooperation and reasonableness extends past, if it does indeed result in an approval, that cooperation and willingness to I don't want to say compromise, but I don't want to be Clinton-esque, but to compromise, to reach a synthesis is maintained. I want to say that I said to Nancy, the reason I think that these homes, the way they're currently designed, speak more of a symphony rather than a cacophony. They do have to work together, and yet they have elements that are very innovative. They do work for that panoramic view in the positioning, so that indeed those homeowners who ultimately purchase those properties are going to have spectacular properties. I think I've spoken enough. I think you have a basic flavor as a personal citizen. My comments as an official are going to be somewhat different, but basically there's still be in support of it, but I have to take a very, very different approach as a harbor master, and there are some pretty significant concerns that I haven't heard addressed yet, that I'm sure that this team is eminently capable of addressing those needs or concerns. Thank you.
Anyone else to speak? Andy?
Just one brief question. I hate to be the one that brings it up, but relative to parking. Do I need to sign? No. Incidentally, I want to congratulate Seth and Charles on a magnificent project and all your professionals. It's fabulous. We're very excited about it.
Thank you.
One niggly question that I hope will be addressed later on. Oh, Andrew Maynard, thank you. Will there be some assurance, and I'll tell you where this comes from, that the assigned parking in the large buildings will be utilized exclusively by residents of those buildings, as opposed to their taking advantage of the street parking at any time? The reason I ask that, in our area of the borough down at the Point, There's lots of people with driveways. If you counted how many people use their driveways all the time, you'd find out why we have a partial parking problem. I don't know what you can do about that, but my question would be, is there a way to ensure that people in those buildings utilize the parking that's designed for them instead of taking up borough parking?
I don't think we can do more than assign people spaces and ask them to park there. I think occasionally people will park on the street. I mean, that's just natural that they'll do that. But I think certainly if I own one of the residences, I'm going to park underneath. It's covered. I have an elevator that takes me right up to my apartment or near to my apartment. So I think the difference here is that people parking in the driveway may have a reason not to access in and out, blocking another car in the driveway, wanting to be right in front of their front door. But here, the most accessible place to the condominiums will be in the garage area. And with regard to the single-family houses, the by far most accessible place to the house and most protected place will be under the house. So I think the natural tendency will be for people to use that parking. And I also think that since they will have assigned spaces, numbered spaces, they will tend to use those spaces as well.
Any other questions or comments? City?
Sylvia Lynch. I wonder if somebody could speak to Inger's unanswered question about the walking, not being allowed to walk at night.
I'd be happy to do that. Charles and I are jointly and separately responsible for a good part of the waterfront access that's been created in the state of Connecticut since the CAM Act. And that's an absolute fact, mostly down in the southern part of the state. And I can't think of one instance where an environment like this wants people to walk through after dark or before dawn. I think that our sense of this is pretty strong, and it's an important part of our presentation, that there are parts of the project that are open later hours, but particular naturalized walkway right along the harbor front would not be. There won't be a gate, there won't be a barrier, but our sense of it is to open it just before dawn and close it just after dusk and not have any lighting there. And I feel that it's an important part of the design element of the project and keeping that space as absolutely natural as possible. I know there are those who disagree, and as Brian said, we perhaps can respectfully, hopefully respectfully disagree, but we feel strongly that that's the right approach for the part of the site that is the natural walkway.
Anyone else?
Just one point of clarification. I don't know, I just want to be clear that the street in front of all of the houses, all right, which is certainly in the borough, that's what people to be able to walk in front of someone's house, any of the houses, walk down the street. Those will have sidewalks, those will be lit, those will be open 24 hours a day. The only place that was being referred to was this path along the water. I'm not sure that was clear, but I want to be absolutely clear about that. It's just the path along the water, just that point where it's not illuminated. It is not some place we want to encourage people to go after dark. It is unlit and unpoliced and not accessible to emergency vehicles.
Was there one more hand in the back?
Pass for now.
Dean, do you want to?
No, I'll say it first.
Anyone else? We have, to end the meeting, for the opportunity for any member of the commission to ask questions on perhaps on what we've heard tonight of some of the consultants, just in case the consultants may not be available at the next meeting, and we do have five or six minutes. Is there anyone on the commission that would like to ask a question of any of the experts from the applicant?
I have quite a few.
Okay. Ready?
First of all, maybe I should just check with our lawyer. Mike, I meant to ask you this before, and we probably should have said it at the start, but I think at least 3 commission members are listed as property owners within 300 feet. In the application, should we say something that said that even though we're close neighbors, that it would not affect our decision? Would it go on record?
Well, I think the first thing to do then, Betty, would be for the people who do have houses that, or property that is that close, we should ask the people in the audience, especially the applicant, whether or not there's any objection to those commission members serving. If there is no objection, then it should not be an issue. If there's an objection, then each commission member will have to consider whether he or she would be advised to step down. I think that would be the first way to approach it.
Mr. Chairman, for the record, Mark Raines. The 300-foot radius is the radius of notification. Your PAD regulation requires that any property owner within 300 feet has to get special mail notice. In an area as compact as the borough and the largest single lot, I think, in the peninsula, 300 feet takes in an awful lot of people. And I can't imagine how you could constitute a commission on any large piece. It's natural, we do not object. We waive any claim of self-interest by commission members. This commission has been very fair with us. No problem.
Thank you, Mark. Does anyone in the audience have a concern about commission members' proximity to the location of this project? Seeing none, thank you.
I do have a question. Are we going to ask the same question that you just raised at the next public hearing and the ones after that?
We should do that. We should do that, just to make sure the record is clear that people are aware of the issues.
Okay, well, I have a few questions, if I could just, well, and especially one,
At least you could raise the questions if nothing else, and we
Right.
can get answers if we don't have time.
Just-
for them. Okay.
wildlife containment, nobody has addressed. And there is a myriad of critters on that site. And I am concerned that once you start going in there and actively demolishing and stirring up their wonderful habitat, we may have rats, raccoons, skunks, more than we have now. And my question is, have you addressed that at all? And is there anything you could do to make certain that we don't have more than we already have?
Actually, we run into that problem quite frequently. We, as the construction people concerned with that, since we'll probably be displacing them, we have an outside safety, call it a safety company, that comes in and they set up a whole system for us with regard to if there's any rodents or anything else on the site before we start doing that. And they do a pre-evaluation of the site, actually, before we start any construction, and they give us instructions exactly how we have to deal with this. We're presently working on a site right now up in northern Maine, which we have a very similar situation to, and they came out there and gave us written directions of exactly what we had to do in order to mitigate that problem. So we're, in the information that, I don't know, did you give them the whole thing? Yeah, there's a whole, we have a whole section which we supplied, which is referred,
I don't think that is.
it was, our whole safety program is in there. It's
By reference.
It's by reference, and if you want it, I will get a copy of it for
No,
you.
if it's part of it, all I just want to know is that
We address it for our own
we
safety as
won't
well.
have more
That's the problem.
critters in our backyards than we have now, it's summer.
If I may, something I didn't add is that when we said we picked the start date for the project, the first 14 days of our start date is what we call the mobilization, where we start to bring our trailers onto the site. And we actually are not doing any work. We're securing the site during the first 14 days. We're bringing the power in. We're having these consultants come in, do this mitigation, and whatever has to be done before we actually, first day we don't start banging away. So there's a whole process that does go on, so we address those issues.
We have only 2 minutes left, so let other people ask questions.
Well, just time for one or two more brief questions. We have another.
When
Just identify yourself for the microphone.
Brian Sheba,
Yeah.
when would it be, when is it appropriate for me to address the commission in the capacity as deputy harbor?
That puzzled me because you said you were going to, then you
I thought that,
disappeared.
yeah, I thought it was, there would be a different, that it was open to the general public, and then you'd ask for comments from.
But I think as deputy harbor master, I think you're speaking in that role alone. I mean,
Well, no, Nancy's here as well.
Well,
and
I'm here, but he speaks and writes better than I do.
we compose this.
Business together.
but I mean, you're You're not representing the Harbor Management Commission, you're speaking
No,
as
we're
the Harbor
representing the
Master.
harbor masters.
Harbor master.
Yeah.
Yes, we are the state's representative. And the state is sovereign for all public trust lands.
And you have a series of questions and comments?
No, this is just a memorandum that we will also submit to the commission in
You
writing.
just want to, you want to read the memorandum and
A
submit it?
portion of it, you know, a
Okay.
significant portion.
Why don't we do that, it'll be the last thing of the meeting tonight,
Terrific.
okay? So when, you want
Oh,
to
you
do
want
it?
to do that?
Yeah, just do it now, and then that'll be the end of the meeting. All right. I didn't realize that that's what you wanted to do, or else I
Do I
would
need to sign in again?
No.
Again, Brian Chief, Deputy Harbor Master. There's a memorandum to the Borough of Stonington Planning and Zoning Commission regarding the former Atwood Machine Tool Company property adaptive reuse proposal. In the judgment of the Stonington Harbor Masters, the dock system and associated dinghy dock proffered to station vessels in the former Atwood Machine Tool Company property adaptive reuse proposal will neither obstruct nor hinder the passage of vessels within Stonington Harbor or navigable waterways. Further, the due diligence was exercised in determining the method of construction and the manner of deployment so as to minimize the likelihood that by the action of wind or tide, structures would become an obstruction or a hindrance to passage of vessels within Stonington Harbor or navigable waterways. Additionally, as the state of Connecticut's local representation, the Harbor Masters have a duty and responsibility to preserve and protect the public's rights under the Public Trust Doctrine and the Harbor Management Act. The doctrine establishes, and the Act affirms, the right of the public to fully enjoy public trust lands, waters, and living resources for a wide variety of recognized public uses. A corollary to the aforementioned right is the right of the public to have reasonable access to trust lands, waters, and resources. In the Harbor Master's judgment, the proposal under consideration meets, albeit minimally, the threshold for reasonable public access. The assertion by the Stonington Water Street Associates LLC that the proposed plan creates public access from both land and harbor, which exceeds any development in borough history, is quite possibly true. It's important to understand that the standard invoked for comparison by Stonington Water Street Associates LLC, that of prior borough development, is a deficient standard with respect to the adequacy of protecting the public trust. Indeed, it is that legacy that necessitates greater vigilance by all trustees of the public trust to insist on proper scrutiny and to apply appropriate standards to contemporary development to ensure that the public trust is preserved. Eloquently stated by the Arizona Supreme Court in Arizona Center for Law in Public Interest versus Hassel, a 1991 public trust doctrine case, that generations of trustees have slept upon public rights does not foreclose their successors from awakening. I want to also state that it would be unfair to expect that this proposal would contain provisions safeguarding the public trust that are sufficiently robust to provide remedy for previous inattention on the part of public trustees and past transgressions upon the public trust by prior developments and developers. So with that, again, I'll emphasize that from our standpoint as trustees of the public trust, it does mean, again, albeit minimally, that recognized right for access to the public trust land. Areas of concern: erosion and sedimentation. The land immediately north of the Atwood breakwater appears to be especially susceptible to erosion due to wave action, to which it has been historically subjected. Should the fill and erosion abatement mediums and methods that are utilized, whether natural or man-made, prove ineffective, will the result of the washout be corrected using an alternative method? That's the question posed. Now, some information was given tonight on stormwater runoff. I have read the big book, and there's a series of questions here. I'll try to be read them as quickly as possible and brief. But I didn't hear that they were specifically addressed in the comments tonight, and if I'm mistaken. Is the stated goal of the stormwater management system sufficiently broad in its scope to identify and remedy potential hazards that one could reasonably anticipate encountering when excavating a site formerly used for manufacturing tooling and associated products? The proposal only addresses the removal of floatable material and total suspended solids through the use of a Vortechnics stormwater treatment structure. I presume that Vortechnics is a registered trade name, and I presume that that's a cyclotronic or centrifugal separator due to specific gravity and density of the materials. That's just a question posed, and we don't have to necessarily have an answer tonight because it may be too. Other thing, and I did hear a little bit about this tonight. Has a soil or groundwater sampling been conducted? I heard that it was. I didn't see that specific contaminants were identified either in the form of suspended solids or things that are water soluble. I'll get to that here. Do the environmental consultants to Stonington Water Street Associates, LLC, Stonington Borough, and/or the DEP have any concerns that disturbing the sediments, along with the associated removal of formerly impervious surfaces, might afford an opportunity for volatile organic compounds, ketones, ethanes, ethylenes, benzenes, that may have been trapped in the soil under that impervious cap, that once exposed might find a pathway into the harbor? Next question posed. Would any water-soluble contaminants likely to be encountered on such a site escape removal by a centrifugal separator? And if present in the exposed soils, could they then percolate or run off into the harbor and pose a threat to water quality? Lastly, under stormwater runoff, I heard something about a sampling plan, and my apologies for not having being totally aware of that at this point, but the question still poses. Should a sampling plan adequate in scope and frequency and conducted for an appropriate duration be employed to provide reasonable certainty that any type of contaminant that might be encountered on a former manufacturing site would be discovered? Further, that the sampling plan provide reasonable certainty that no type of stormwater-borne contaminant is present in sufficient concentrations to pose a threat to the harbor's water quality. I'd like to in summation, the participatory disposition of the agents of Stonington Water Street Associates, LLC, characterized discussions relevant to the evolution of this proposal is appreciated. The willingness of those representatives to listen carefully and assent to reasonable requests from the community they are seeking to join has resulted in a compromise beneficial to all. The Harbor Masters trust that this participatory disposition demonstrated today will remain evident at forthcoming discussions resulting in an equitable proposal acceptable to all. The judgments and areas of concerns expressed tonight by the Harbor Masters in this memorandum are not meant to be portrayed as a result of rigorous or comprehensive engineering or legal analysis. Rather, they represent a thorough review of the proposal in question, providing reasonable assurance to the community we serve that the obligations of the Harbor Masters have been properly discharged. And finally, the Harbor Masters reserve the right to amend this memorandum in whole or in part, subject to material changes to the proposal being considered resulting from this hearing or any continuances that ensue.
put this in an exhibit page, and you'll distribute it to... Thank you. We're going to continue this public hearing on Saturday, June 30th at 10:30 in the morning, and on that we'll adjourn at 10:40 p.m. Thank you very much, everybody.